Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to this third video that we're doing on the creation of the actions of the servants. And in this third video, we're going to talk about the Shia and how their belief evolved and how they started mimicking the Mu'tazila, how they shifted their positions from one side to another. And this is well important because it shows that this is the Shi'i madhab is a madhab that got influenced by other madhab, and it evolved and changed. It is not the same beliefs that their ancestors have that they are upon today. So in terms of creations of the actions, where were they and where are they now? From my research, it seems they passed by 5 stages. And we start with the first one. The first one is that the early Imami Shia believed in Jabr. They believed in compulsion, meaning that God created everything, including the actions of the servants, their decision, and pretty much everything. He guides whoever he wishes, he misguides whoever he wishes, and they have no choice in the matter. And this was what was stated by Al-Murtada, and he says that the early Qummis believed in this, and that their books and testimonies, their books and works are testimony to this. So that was the early Shia, possibly Imami Shia from the 3rd century. As for the early 4th century, there was a transformation because they were already getting influenced by other sects. So in the early 4th century, you have Kulayni and his associates, and what they did was there was, of course, the 2 extremes at the time. There was the Mujabbirah, such as the early Shia and the Jabriyyah were Mujabbirah, who believed in compulsion, meaning God created everything. And then there was the Mu'tazila, which is the other extreme that believed that God gave complete freedom to the servants to create their own actions. So Kulayni and his friends, they went and they took a path in the middle. They said, yes, God creates everything, and God is the creator of everything. However, the servants are not compelled. So they're not forced, meaning they have a freedom of choice, yet God still is creating everything. So this was the middle path they took. And now the Shia at this point were in the middle. By the late 4th century, you had Saduq and his friends. And Saduq, what he did was, he divided actions of the servants into 2 parts. He says, one part is created by us, and one part is created by God. He says, the part created by God is the part where there is predestination, meaning God predestined everything, and everything was inscribed on the eternal board or the eternal tablet. Whereas the actions in the physical world are done and committed by us, so we are the ones doing them. So he split it into 2. So he became even closer to the Mu'tazili belief, yet he still didn't say with absolute, in the absolute sense that the servants create their own actions. Finally, we have Al-Mufid and his students that came at the beginning of the 5th century, and they said that the servants made their own actions and did their own actions, which is the same thing. They believed that the servants basically created their own actions, but Al-Mufid said we don't say that they created their own actions out of respect for God. He said, so out of respect for God, we don't say it. So at this point, the Shia became pretty much exactly like the Mu'tazila. The only difference is semantics. They just don't want to say that the servants created their own actions. They'll say things like they made, they crafted, they this, they that, but not that they created. And the final stage is the late Imami Shia, such as Al-Hilli, Tabatabai, and others, who openly say the exact same thing as the Mu'tazila say. Yes, the servants create their own actions. They make the decisions and they create the actions, and God has nothing to do with it. God takes a back seat. So that is the 5 stages, and we're going to elaborate more as we go along now. All right, so let's start with giving examples from the books of the Shia on some of the ancient beliefs they held, which is Jabr, that everything that they are basically God compels the servants and that they have no choice in the matter. So we're going to quote a couple of their narrations to that effect, and they have a few here and there. We take an example from Tawheed by Saduq, their leader. And the hadith is from Sulaiman bin Khalid from Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. The Imam says, God تبارك وتعالى إذا أراد بعبد خيرا نكت في قلبه نكتة من نور. God Most High, if He wished well for one of His servants, then He will create a spot of light in his heart. وَفَتَحَ مَسَامِعَ قَلْبَهُ, and He will open and He will clear out his heart. And He will appoint to him an angel that will guide him. However, if God wished harm for one of His servants, then He will place in his heart a dark spot. نُكْتَةً سوداء وَسَدَّ مَسَامِعَ قَلْبِهِ, and He will block his heart. And He will appoint to him a devil that misguides him. Then Abu Abdullah alayhi salam recited this verse. فَمَنْ يُرِدُ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ وَمَنْ يُرِدْ أَنْ يُضِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. So he quotes a verse which says that if God wishes to guide someone, then He will open his heart towards Islam, and if God wishes to misguide someone, then He will make things really difficult for them. And as you can see here, this is clearly in accordance with the belief of Jabr, and this is in Saduq's book, and this is, narrated by the Shia Imamiyya themselves. And it doesn't leave much choice for the servant here. It's saying that if God wanted to do this, He would do it. If God wanted to do that, He would do it. We give another sample, this time from Qurb al-Isnad by al-Himyari, and he's one of their old scholars, 3rd century. So he says, عن البزنطي عن الرضا, from Imam al-Rida, he says, Ali ibn Hussein كان إذا ناجى ربه, when he used to supplicate to his Lord, he would say, O Lord, قويت على معصيتك بنعمتك. قويت على معصيتك, meaning through your blessing, I had the power to disobey you. What does that mean? It means he couldn't disobey Him in and of himself. He needed God's power. So he's kind of saying that God is the one who's in control. And then he says, وَسَمْعَتُهُ يَقُولُ, he said regarding the verse of Allah, God does not change a people unless they change themselves. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ وَإِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِقَوْمٍ سُوءًا فَلَا مَرَدَّ لَهُ. And if God wishes harm for a people, then there's no one that could prevent it. So Ali bin Hussein said regarding this verse, إِنَّ الْقَدَرِيَّةَ يَحْتَجُّونَ بِأَوَّلِهَا وَلَيْسَ كَمَا يَقُولُونَ. He says the Qadariyah meaning the deniers of predestination, the tazilites basically. He says they argue with the beginning part of this verse, with the first part of this verse, the part that says that God will only change it if they change it themselves. However, he says, وَلَيْسَ كَمَا يَقُولُونَ. Ali ibn Abi Talib says, it is not, Ali ibn Hussein, says, it is not as they say, because Allah says, وَإِنْ أَرَادَ بِقَوْمٍ سُوءًا فَلَا مَرَدَّ لَهُ. And if God wishes harm for a people, then there's no one that could prevent it. So Ali ibn Hussein is showing that, no, this is in God's control, not in the control of the servants themselves. And then Ali ibn Hussein says, وَقَالَ نُوحٍ, Prophet Nuh says, and my advice to you shall not benefit you if God wished to misguide you. إِن كَانَ اللَّهُ يُرِيدُ أَنْ يَغْوِيَكُمْ. If God wished to misguide you, then my advice to you shall not benefit you. This is what Ali ibn Hussein quoted Nuh as saying, alayhi salam. قَالَ الْأَمْرُ إِلَى اللَّهِ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. The matter is up to Allah, He guides whomever He wishes. Again, the second hadith here is pretty clear that it is about compulsion, that you are compelled, you don't have much choice, and that God is in complete control. So this is not, these types of narrations are not a type of narration that the Shia of our days would accept. They would reject these straight away, even though their books have quite a bunch of these. In fact, these narrations are a lot more numerous, as you will see, than anything else. Next, we move on to Tafsir al-Qummi, from the narration of Abu Jarud from the Imam of Abdullah, and about the saying of Allah, كَمَا بَدَأَكُمْ تَعُودُونَ فَرِيقًا هَدَى وَفَرِيقًا حَقَّ عَلَيْهِمُ الضَّلَالُ. You will return as you were. A group of you He guides, and another group will find that misguidance is unavoidable. حَقَّ عَلَيْهِمُ الضَّلَالُ. So the Imam commented on this, says, he says God created them from the moment He created them, a believer and a disbeliever, a happy person and a wretched person, and they will return to be as such on the day of judgment, a guided person and a misguided person. So he's saying that this is predestined from before. They're created as such. And then he comments on the saying of Allah, إِنَّهُمْ اتَّخَذُوا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ. They took the devils as friends aside from Allah, and they consider themselves as being guided. So he says, وَهُمُ الْقَدَرِيَّةِ. These, the people in this verse, that are being criticized in this verse, they are the Qadariyah. They are those who deny predestination. الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ لَا قَدَرٍ. Those who say that there's no destiny, there's no fate. وَيَزْعَمُونَ أَنَّهُمْ قَادِرُونَ عَلَى الْهُدَى وَالضَّلَالَةِ. And claim that they are capable of both guidance and misguidance. So it's up to them, they claim. وَذَلِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ إِنْ شَاءُوا اهْتَدُوا وَإِنْ شَاءُوا ضَلُّوا. And it is up to them. If they want to be guided, then they will guide themselves. If they want to be misguided, they will misguide themselves. So it's a matter of choice, they're saying. And he says about them, وَهُمْ مَجُوسُ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ وَكَذَبَ أَعْضَاءَ اللَّهِ الْمَشِيئَةَ وَالْقَدْرَ. And he says they are the Zoroastrians of this nation. And because the Zoroastrians, if you actually look into their religion, they have a very, very similar belief. It says that they are the enemies of Allah and that they reject God's destiny. And later on, he says in that same report, وَمَنْ خَلَقَهُ سَعِيدًا يَوْمَ خَلَقَهُ كَذَلِكَ يَعُودُ إِلَيْهِ سَعِيدًا. And whoever he creates happy will return to be happy, and whoever he creates wretched will create to be wretched. And the one who is happy while still in his mother's womb, and the one who is wretched while still in his mother's womb. So he again is stressing and emphasizing on predestination here. Another sample is from Saduq's Tawheed, and this is from the attribute to Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. He says that the actions are three types. He says the first type is fara'id, obligatory duties, what God meaning ordered us to do. Wa fada'il, meaning virtuous acts that are not necessarily obligatory. Wa ma'asi, and acts of disobedience. أما الفرائض, as for the obligatory duties, فبأمر الله تعالى وبرضا الله وبقضائه. The obligatory duties are by Allah's command, and through the pleasure of Allah they happen, and through what He has ordained, and through His decree, okay, and through His will, and by His knowledge. The obligatory acts happen through these. As for the virtuous acts, then they are not commanded by God, ليست بأمر الله. However, they are with through God being pleased with them, meaning through the pleasure of God, وبقضاء الله, through what God has ordained, وبقدر الله, through God's decree, وبمشيئة الله, through God's will, وبعلم الله, through God's knowledge. أما المعاصي, he says finally, as for the acts of disobedience, then obviously they are not by God's commands. However, they happen through what He has ordained and what He has decreed, and through His will and through His knowledge. Then ثم يعاقب عليها, then He punishes by these acts. He punishes these acts. So here you're saying also, Ali ibn Abi Talib was saying that all these things are happening by God has ordained them and He has decreed them, okay, and they happen through His will and with His knowledge. He's giving complete, pretty much control to God. He's just saying that God never commanded us to do this, or He never commanded us to do that. The final example that we will give of this type of narration is in Ram Abil Faris's book Al-Hilli, and it's called Al-Majmu'at Al-Warram. And he attributes to Abu Abdullah alayhi salam that he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَمَرَ تَخِيرًا وَنَهَى تَحْذِيرًا. God has commanded تَخِيرًا. He has ordered and He has given the choice to His servants. وَنَهَى تَحْذِيرًا. And He has warned them to caution them. So He forbade certain actions and cautioned them and warned them from these actions. لَمْ يُطَعْ مُكْرَهًا. The servants do not obey God forcefully, in the sense that it's not like God doesn't want to be obeyed and they're forcing their obedience upon Him. وَلَمْ يُعْصَ مَغْلُوبًا. And He is not coerced to be disobeyed. فَلَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ أَنْ لَا يُعْصَى لَمَا عَصِيَهُ. He says, the Imam says that if God didn't wish to be obeyed, then He would have simply made it so that nobody would obey Him. وَلَكِنَّهُ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. However, God does what He wills. وَيَحْكُمُ مَا يُرِيدُ وَلَهُ الْحُجَّةُ الْبَالِغَةُ عَلَى الْخَلْقِ كَذَا كَذَا كَذَا. Then he says, وَهُوَ خَالِقُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. And He is the creator of everything, the Imam says. Then he explains that and he says, الْخَيْرُ وَالشَّرُّ. the good and the evil, وَالْحُلْوُ وَالْمُرِّ, the sweet things and the bitter things. And God Most High said, he quotes this verse in the Quran, تَعْبُدُونَ مَا تَنْحِتُونَ وَاللَّهُ خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. You worship that which you make. However, God created you and that which you make. And so the Imam says, فَعَلَمَنَا أَنَّ خَلْقَنَا وَجَمِيعَ أَعْمَالِنَا بِقُدْرَتِهِ. So the Imam says that God notified us that our creation, meaning the fact that we are created, and all of our actions, وَجَمِيعَ أَعْمَالِنَا بِقُدْرَتِهِ, are by His will and through His power. So these are examples of narrations that are basically purely compulsory, purely Jabriyyah, or as we say, fatalist narrations. Narrations of predeterminations, meaning you don't have a choice in the matter and that God does what He wills. And these, of course, are rejected today. With that being said, what are the most numerous narrations that are reported from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, according to based on the Shia sources, based on the Imam Shia? What are the most numerous narrations? Are they the ones saying that you have no choice, or are they others? Al-Majlisi responds. He says in Bihar al-Anwar, volume 5, page 82. He says, اعلم أن الذي استفاض على الأئمة هو نفي الجبر والتفويض وإثبات أمر بين الأمرين. He says, know, dear reader, that what is reported through plentiful chains from the Imams is that there is no compulsion, there is no jabr. And jabr means is when God creates your decisions and actions, so you have no control whatsoever. So it's to deny it. The Imams deny it through plentiful chains. And they also deny what he says is at-tafweed. And at-tafweed, according to al-Majlisi, he says, هو ما ذهب إليه المعتزلة. It is the belief of the Mu'tazila that in Allah Ta'ala أوجد العباد, that God created the servants وأقدرهم على تلك الأفعال, and He gave them the power to create their own actions and to choose their own decisions. So they are independent when they create their actions according to their own wills and powers. وَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ فِي أَفْعَالِهِمْ صَنْعًا, and God has nothing to do with their actions. So this is tafweed. All right. So tafweed is basically exactly what the Mu'tazila say, that the people create their own actions and that God has nothing to do with them. So he's saying that the narrations from the Imams are plentiful in denying both jabr and tafweed, وإثبات أمر بين الأمرين, and establishing that there's a matter between these two matters. So between these two extremes, there's the matter which is the truth. And that's actually the belief of Ahl Sunnah and this thing. But we have a sample here from the book Al-Khisal by Saduq, and it's from Hariz, from Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. He says, the people, الناس في القدر على ثلاثة أوجه. When it comes to destiny, people are three types. A man who claims that God compelled people to do wrongdoings. So this man has judged God and oppressed him. You know, he made an oppressive judgment of God. وهو كافر, and he is a disbeliever. ورجل يزعم أن الأمر مفوض إليهم فهذا وهن الله في سلطانه. And a man who claims that God consigned to the servants the creation of their actions, meaning God gave them the ability to create their own actions. The Imam says, وَهَذَا وَهَنَ اللَّهُ فِي سُلْطَانِهِ. And this guy weakened or took God out of His own authority, or kept God away from His own dominion and authority, meaning he says that God has no control. فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ, and therefore he is a disbeliever. وَرَجُلٌ يَقُولُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ كَلَّفَ الْعِبَادَ مَا يُطِيقُونَ. And the third person is the person who says that God, gave the servants the things that they are not outside of their control. وَلَمْ يُكَلِّفْهُمْ مَا لَا يُطِيقُونَ. He did not burden them with more than they can bear and handle. So if the servant does well, he praises God, and if he doesn't do well, he seeks God's forgiveness. فَهَذَا Muslim. He says this is the Muslim. So he established something between the two, where God did not compel them, so they can have no control, nor is it that they're creating their own actions. Meaning that God is creating their actions, but they also have a choice, and when they do well, they thank God, and when they do wrong, they seek His forgiveness. This is obviously the belief of Ahl Sunnah here. Now, what I'm going to do is, since this is the more popular madhab at the time of Al-Kulayni, we'll go through Kulayni's book, pretty much the whole the related chapters on volume 1 of his book. We will go through them and we will see what is Al-Kulayni exactly preaching here, What is he teaching? Because keep in mind that Al-Kulayni is like Bukhari, meaning he only includes in his book what he deems is correct and what he thinks that you should believe in. So we will go through, starting with the first chapter, which is the on volume 1. It's called Chapter on the Wish and the Will. Al-Bashi'atu wal-Irada. So the first hadith says, I heard Abu al-Hasan, Musa bin Ja'far, saying, there can be nothing except if Allah wishes, wills, measures, and decrees. Okay? لا يكون شيء إلا ما شاء الله وأراد وقدر وقضى. Meaning there's nothing can come in existence except if God wills it and wishes it and decrees it and measures it. What does that mean? It means he creates it pretty much. So other than that, it can be nothing. So it's complete nothingness. Therefore, this opposes the belief of the Mu'tazila that the servants can create their own actions. Here he's saying they're complete nothingness. It can't happen. He's saying it cannot be. So the narration continues. The companion asks, what is the meaning of sha'a, wished? He says, the Imam replied, it is to begin the act. See, it is to begin the act. I asked, what is the meaning of measure, qaddara? The Imam replied, it is measuring the length and the width of something, meaning planning it precisely. He means plans it precisely, or predetermines it accurately, we can say. I asked, what is the meaning of decree, which is qada? The Imam replied, when he decrees, he lets it happen, and this is when it's happening becomes unavoidable. So notice this; these narrations here are more leaning to the side of Jabr than the side of Qadar. They're more fatalist than they are libertarian narrations. So next we'll start going through some of the narrations in Al-Kafi. We're still in the same chapter. This next one is authenticated by their scholars. From Abu Basir, he asked Abu Abdullah. He says, has God wished, willed, decreed, and ordained? The Imam replied, yes. Naam. قلت وأحب. And does that mean that he liked and loved certain things to happen? The Imam said, no. He says, then how come he's willing and wishing and ordaining and decreeing if he doesn't love the things that he's wishing and willing and ordaining? And the Imam says, هكذا خرج إلينا. This is how we learned it. And this is interesting because it shows in an authentic narration that the Imam didn't have the answer. So this is a calamity of the hadith, actually. It shows that the Imam had no answer to give the man. Definitely not a good thing for the ghulat. The next hadith is from Abdullah ibn Sinan, from Abu Abdullah, قال سمعته يقول, I heard him say, أمر الله ولم يشأ وشاء ولم يأمر. God, he says, God has commanded he says in certain situations, God commanded and did not wish. And in other situations, he wished, but he did not command. And then he gave examples. He commanded Iblis to prostrate to Adam, but he wished, or he willed, that this never happened. Because as you know, Iblis never actually prostrated. So God willed that this never happens, even though he commanded it. وَلَوْ شَاءَ لَسَجَدَ. And if God willed it, he would have prostrated. And then he gives another example. وَنَهَى آدَمْ عَنْ أَكْلِ الشَّجْرَةِ. And he forbade Adam from eating from the tree. وَشَاءَ أَنْ يَأْكُلَ مِنْهَا. But he wished, or he willed, that Adam actually go and eat from him, even though he commanded otherwise. وَلَوْ لَمْ يَشَأْ لَمْ يَأْكُلْ. So again, this is all what? This is Jabri. And we continue on here. Ahmad bin Muhammad bin Abi Nasr قال أبو الحسن الرضا. This is narrated from Imam al-Rida in the same chapter, and this is authenticated by their scholars. قال الله يا ابن آدم بمشيئتي كنت أنت الذي تشاء. God says, O son of Adam, through my will you are able to will for yourself whatever you will. بقوتي أديت فرائضي. And through my power you are able to fulfill the obligatory duties. Notice he doesn't say through your power, through the power of the servant, through my power. What does that mean? It means he's creating the action. And he's saying you cannot will except if I will. So that's also closer to the beliefs of the Jabriyyah than it is to the beliefs of the Mu'tazila that the Shia nowadays are believing in. Next, we move to another chapter. It's called an al-Kafi. It's the chapter of happiness and sadness. Sa'adat wa shaqa, I guess it's in Arabic. And in this chapter, he has 3 reports. All of them are the same meaning. They're all 3 reports are in the same meaning. However, only the first one is authentic, so we'll quote the first one. منصور بن حازم عن أبي عبد الله عليه السلام, from أبي عبد الله عليه السلام, قال إن الله خلق السعادة والشقاء. It says God created happiness and wretchedness and sadness, meaning قبل أن يخلق خلقه, before he created his servants. فمن خلقه الله سعيدا لم يبغضه أبدا إن عمل شرا. So he's saying, if whoever God creates as being destined to be from among the happy ones, then God will never detest this person. Even if this person did do an act of evil, he will detest his act of evil, but he will not detest him. وإن كان شقيا لم يحبه أبدا. If he created him to be destined to be among the sad ones or the wretched ones, he would never love him, even if he did a good thing. أحب عمله وأبغضه لما يصير إليه. He will love his action, but he will not love him, as he knows that he is destined for an unfortunate and terrible ending. So this is authentic. And I remind you of the guy who was accusing us, the Shia who was accusing Ahl Sunnah in the previous video, that, oh, you guys say God is a rapist, and you guys say God is a murderer. Let's see how he's going to deal with these calamities here, because these are authentic, and these are worse. These are closer to Jabriyyah than the actual belief of Kasab al-Ash'ari, or the acquisition of al-Ash'ari. Next chapter is on good and evil. It's called the chapter on good and evil. And it's from Ibn Wahb. قال سمعت أبا عبد الله. He says, I heard Abu Abdullah عليه السلام يقول مما أوحى الله إلى موسى وأنزل عليه في التوراة. It is God has revealed to Moses عليه السلام in the Torah, إني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا خلقت الخلق وخلقت الخير وأجريته. There is no God except me. I created all the servants, and I created goodness, وأجريتها على يدي من أحب. And I created goodness, and I made it happen by the hands of those I love. So God's saying, I created goodness and made it happen by the hands of those I love. And by the way, this is authentic. فَطُوبَى لِمَنْ أَجْرَيْتُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. So glad tidings to the one who I favored in this. وَأَنَا اللَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا خَلَقْتُ الْخَلْقَ وَخَلَقْتُ الشَّرَّ. And then he says, and I am God, there's no God except me. I created the creatures, and I created evil. وَأَجْرَيْتُهَا عَلَى يَدَيْ مَنْ أُرِيدُهُ. And I made evil happen by the hands of those that I chose, by the individuals that I chose. So woe to those whom I have afflicted with this. So this is authentic. This is saying that God created good and evil, and he chose people and made them do the good deeds, and he chose people and made them do the bad deeds. Again, this is not something they'll accept, even though it's authentic. And this is an al-Kafi. And this is, by the way, this is what the author of al-Kafi believes. So I don't know what you're going to call him now. You're going to call him a kafir, or I don't know what you're going to do. And these are the narrations of Ahlul Bayt. Again, through your same narrators, and they're authentic and they're plentiful. We have another narration in the same chapter. عن محمد بن مسلم قال سمعت أبا جعفر. I heard Abu Ja'far عليه السلام say, يقول إن في بعض ما أنزل الله من كتبه إني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا خلقت الخير وخلقت الشر. It's a very similar narration to the previous one, but it's with a different chain of narrators, and it's authentic. He's saying, I heard that God said in some of his previous heavenly books that I am God, I created good, and I created evil. So glad tidings to those whom to those whom I've basically blessed by allowing them to do the good things, and woe to those whom I have made to do the evil things. And he says, woe to those who say, how is this possible and how is that possible? So here, this is against the Mu'tazila. This is authentic, and this is criticizing the Mu'tazila. It's because the Mu'tazila are going to be like, how is this possible? How can God do this? This is injustice. How is this possible? How is that possible? And God is warning them. He's saying, woe to you. This is according to the Imam. And this is Sahih. Also, there's a third narration with the same meaning in this chapter. However, it is weak. Again, according to Al-Kulayni, God is making people do the bad actions and the evil things, and God is creating good and allowing other people to do the good. And this is what this narration is saying clearly. It's saying, أَجْرَيْتُهُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. meaning I made it happen by their hands. Not that they did it, he made it happen by their hands. So it's very clear text here. Finally, we have the chapter on compulsion, fate, and the station in between. The station in between, this is what the Ash'ari believe in. Manzila bayn al-manzilatayn. So we start this with an authentic narration from Ibrahim bin Umar al-Yamani an Abi Abdullah alayhi salam قال, and this is authenticated by their scholars, إن الله خلق الخلق فعلم ما هم صائرون إليه. God, the Imam says that God created the creations and he knew what they were destined to, meaning he knew where they were heading. وأمرهم ونهاهم, and he ordered them and he prohibited them. So whatever it is that he ordered them, فقد جعل لهم السبيل لتركه. He gave them the choice to take it or leave it. Whatever it is that he commanded them, he gave them the choice to take it or leave it. Which means that they have what? Freedom of choice, as Ahl Sunnah say. ولا يكونوا آخذين ولا تاركين إلا بإذن الله. However, they will never take it or leave it except with the permission of God. So he's saying that there's a will above your will here. And this is authentic. And this, again, these would be just discarded by the Mu'tazilis if they came across them. But the Shia, they have them. And their books are filled with these. I'm only giving you guys samples here. Next narrations by Hafs bin Qurt an Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. He says that the Prophet ﷺ says, من زعم أن الله يأمر بالسوء والفحشاء فقد كذب على الله. Whoever claims that God commands people to do evil deeds and acts of lewdness and wickedness has lied against Allah. ومن زعم أن الخير والشر بغير مشيئة الله فقد أخرج الله من سلطانه. And whoever claims that good and evil happen without the will of God, فَقَدْ أَخْرَجَ اللَّهُ مِنْ سُلْطَانِهِ. He has stripped God of his authority. وَمَنْ زَعَمَ أَنَّ الْمَعَاصِي بِغَيْرِ قُوَّةِ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ كَذَبَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And whoever claims that acts of disobedience happen by a power other than the power of God, this is what the Mu'tazila say, فَقَدْ كَذَبَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Then he has lied against Allah. وَمَنْ كَذَبَ عَلَى اللَّهِ أَدْخَلَهُ اللَّهُ النَّارَ. And whoever lies against Allah, God will throw him in the hellfire. So he's saying that the acts of disobedience are not by your own personal power, it is by the power of God. We take a third narration from Abu Abdullah قلت the companion here asked Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, قال قلت أجبر الله العباد على المعاصي. Has God compelled his servants to do evil actions or acts of disobedience? The Imam says, لا, no. قال قلت ففوض إليهم الأمر. Is it a matter of tafweed that he consigned to them the matter and gave them the freedom? قال لا. The Imam also said no. قال قلت فماذا قال لطف من ربك بين ذلك. He says the truth is that there is a position of grace, or the truth is that there's a grace from your Lord. It is a matter between the two matters. So he neither compelled them, nor did he give them the freedom to do their own, to create their own actions. The next narration is authentic from Abu Ja'far and Abu Abdullah. So this one's narrated from the two Imams at the same time, the Al-Baqir and Saduq. They both said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَرْحَمُ بِخَلْقِهِ مِنْ أَنْ يَجْبُرَ خَلْقَهُ عَلَى الذُّنُوبِ ثُمَّ يُعَذِّبَهُمْ عَلَيْهَا. They're saying that God is more merciful than to compel his servants to commit deeds and then punish them for it. God is more merciful than this. He wouldn't do this, meaning. وَاللَّهُ أَعَزُّ أَنْ يُرِيدَ أَمْرًا فَلَا يَكُونَ. And God is more glorious than to have willed something and then that thing doesn't take place. So whatever God wills has to take place. So they asked him, فَسُئِلَا عَلَيْهِمَا. The people asked him, هَلْ بَيْنَ الجَّبْرِ وَالْقَدْرِ مَنْزِلَةٌ ثَالِثَةٌ. Is between compulsion and denying predestination, is between these two a third station? قَالَ نَعَمْ أَوْسَعْ مِمَّا بَيْنِ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ. They said, yes, it is wider than the distance between the heaven and the earth. Meaning it's such an important station. It's such a, you don't have to take the two extremes, basically, they're saying. You don't have to say that the servants are creating their own actions and they're completely free. And you don't have to say the one that says that they're compelled and they have no choice whatsoever. So again, this was authentic. Next is Salih bin Sahl عن بعض أصحابه عن أبي عبد الله عليه السلام قال Abu Abdullah was asked about Jabr wal Qadr. He was asked about compulsion and about denying predestination. فقال, he says, لا جبر ولا قدر. It is not true that they are compelled, and it is not true those that deny predestination. ولكن منزل بينهما فيها الحق. However, there is a station between them wherein there is truth. لا يعلمه إلا العالم. The one who knows it is the one who is knowledgeable, the scholar. The last hadith we'll quote from Al-Kafi, also authentic. Hisham bin Salim, I think this is Hisham al-Jawadiq, عن Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he says, Allahu akram min an yukallif an-nasa ma la yutiqun. God is kinder than to make the servants religiously accountable for something that they cannot bear its burden. Wallahu a'azzu, and God is more glorious min an yakuna fi sultanihi ma la yurid. God is more glorious than that a thing could happen or occur in his kingdom, meaning this world, that he doesn't will or he doesn't want. So meaning everything that happens is by his will and by his want. Again, reminding you another time of that guy who was accusing Ahl Sunnah of believing that God is a rapist and God is a murderer and all that. Compare that to the hadith of Ahl Bayt in your books. Now the Shia, as you know, we said at the beginning that they passed by stages. So they shifted positions because they were hell-bent on imitating the Mu'tazila, and they abandoned all of these narrations, believe it or not. These are like in their main books, and they abandoned them. So we jump from a Kulayni stage right now to a Saduq stage, and we will see what Saduq has to say. As Saduq says in his book of Aqa'id, page 75, and Saduq is obviously trying to inch closer towards the Mu'tazila, because if you read his book, you'll actually realize that he was under attack and his entire sect was under attack because of their belief in Jabr and because of their belief in compulsion. So they were under attack and they wanted to defend themselves. So he started to adopt more of a Mu'tazili position. He says, اعتقادنا في أفعال العباد أنها مخلوقة. Our belief concerning the actions of the servants is that they are created. Okay? Then he elaborates. He says, خلق تقدير لا خلق تكوين. He says they are created, a creation of taqdir, not a creation of takween. And I will explain this. ومعنى ذلك أنه لم يزل الله عالما بمقاديرها. Meaning that God has always knew since eternity the precise measures of these actions. Meaning God always knew about them. The commentator of the book, the researcher of the book, wrote in the footnotes, he's one of their scholars, and he wrote, أي مقدرة بأن تقع بإرادته. He's explaining what is a creation of taqdir. He says, أي مقدرة بأن تقع بإرادتهم, meaning they are decreed, he decreed that it must come to be by their will, بإرادتهم, by their will it must come to be, but this was decreed by God, meaning this was predetermined. Not formed like other matters detached from the servant's will, meaning not خلق التكوين or the creation of takween. So here we have two types of خلق. And Al-Astrabadi says in his Hashia, also explaining what is خلق التقدير, he says, وَخَلْقُ التَّقْدِيرِ نُقُوشُ اللَّوْحِ الْمَحْفُوظ. The creation of taqdir are the inscriptions on the preserved tablet, meaning the tablet which is in the heavens. وخلق التكوين الوجود في الخارج وهو من فعلنا. As for the creation of takween or creation in the physical world, this is from our own doing. So here, Saduq split the actions of the servants into two things. He doesn't want to say that, we create our actions and that's it, because that would have an issue with the narrations. But he says that God creates a taqdir. Taqdir in Arabic is to measure something accurately or determine it precisely. So he's saying خلق تقدير, meaning a creation of predetermination, and that God has predetermined it, and it was inscribed on the eternal preserved, or the preserved, tablet in the heavens. Okay, this is how God created it. However, us in this world, we do it ourselves. We appear like we're creating ourselves. So this is what he split it into two. And as you will see later, Al-Murtada and Mufid are not going to be happy with this because they're more Mu'tazili than Saduq. Saduq is a scholar of hadith and from the older, a little bit more traditional. Whereas in the Mu'tazili, the Murtada and Mufid are more Mu'tazili in their leanings. So they will attack As-Saduq big time for saying this. And so we see that As-Saduq here believed in a type of predetermination. He also says in the same book, At-Tawheed, page 216, we read in page 216, وفي قول أئمتنا إن أفعال العباد مخلوق خلق تقدير لا خلق تقويم. And in the statements of our Imams, peace be upon them, the actions of the servants are created, a creation of predetermination, of خلق تقدير, not a خلق تقويم, not a creation in the physical world. وخلق عيسى, and he gives an example. He says, وخلق عيسى من الطير كهيئة الطير. And Isa created from the clay, من الطين, خلق من الطين كهيئة الطير, the shape of a bird. So what is he comment on this saying? هو خلق تقدير أيضا. He's saying this is also a creation of predetermination. ومكون الطير وخالقه في الحقيقة هو الله عز وجل. As for the entity that truly did this act of creation and that truly did the creation, it is God. So he's saying that Isa basically only looked or seemed outwardly and apparently as he was creating the bird. However, the true creator of the bird, he's saying, was God. So he will quote certain narrations. Obviously, they're weak narrations, by the way, but or at least some of them are weak, I know for a fact, because they have al-Amash. So in his book of Tawheed, he says, from Ja'far bin Muhammad, قال فيما وصف له من شرائع الدين أن الله لا يكلف نفسا إلا وسعها, that God does not burden a soul except with what it could handle. يكلفها فوق طاقتها, and it does not burden it with what is above its capacity. وأفعال العباد مخلوقة, and the actions of the servants are created. خلق تقدير, a creation of predetermination. لا خلق تقويم, not an actual real creation in this physical world. والله خالق كل شيء, and God is the creator of everything. ولا نقول بالجبر ولا نقول بالتفويض, and we do not believe in jabr, compulsion, nor do we believe that the servants create their own actions. So notice this narration is clearly saying that there's something in between. However, it's also saying that God is creating through predetermination, and that the servants they appear as if they are creating in this world, but God is actually the one creating, which also is something rejected by the Mu'tazilites. And then the other narration from Abu Basir and Abi Abdullah, that he was asked, سئل عن المعرفة أهي مكتسبة فقال لا. He was asked about knowledge, is it acquired? He said no. فقيل له فمن صنع الله, is it that God created it? ومن عطائه هي قال نعم, yes, God has created it. وليس للعباد فيها صنعا, and the servants had nothing to do with it. It was God that created it. ولهم اكتساب الأعمال, and they only acquire the actions. وقال إن أفعال العباد مخلوقة خلق تقدير لا خلق تكوين, and the actions of the servants are created a creation of predetermination, not a creation of not a real physical world creation. And you notice here that Saduq is ignoring the narrations that were in Al-Kulayni's book, because the narrations in Al-Kulayni's books do not help him, and he's going after these vague narrations that are saying that the actions are created a creation of predetermination. This is because he's trying to shift positions. And so he had to ignore all of those ahadith, and he wouldn't mention them. He's relying on something else. In fact, he had to rely on the first hadith, which is from Al-Amash, which is a Sunni narrator. And then the third hadith here I saw in Tawheed from Hamdan bin Sulaiman, who says, I wrote to Ar-Rida, أسأله عن أفعال العباد, asking him about the action of the servant. أمخلوقة هي أم غير مخلوقة? Are they created or uncreated? فكتب أفعال العباد. So Ar-Rida عليه السلام wrote me back, the actions of the servants مقدرة في علم الله, are predetermined in God's knowledge before he created 2,000 years before he created his servants. So as you can see, this narration really makes absolutely no sense. Are you saying that God had this predetermined knowledge of what's going to happen 2,000 years before he created the servants? I thought God's knowledge was eternal, and that he always knew this would happen, that God knows what was and what is to be. And this is what we Muslims know. So again, Saduq had to go through, I guess, really dubious, assuming he didn't fabricate these narrations, he had to go through really dubious channels to acquire narrations like these that conflict obviously with what Kulayni was saying previously. In fact, what I actually found is that this last hadith, which sounded really weird from Ar-Rida, is a perversion and a corruption of a hadith which is found in another book called Tuhaf al-Uqul, also by a 4th century scholar called Al-Harrani. And he says from Fudail bin Yasar, he says, I asked Ar-Rida عن أفاعيل العباد مخلوقة هي about the actions of the servants, are they created or not? So Ar-Rida answers him, هي والله مخلوقة, by Allah they are created. So as you can see, Ar-Rida gave a really straightforward and direct answer. He says they are created. He didn't go left and right. However, the narrator of this, he says, he comments on what Ar-Rida says, and he says, أراد خلق تقدير لا خلق تكوين. The Imam intended that he created it a creation of predetermination, not a creation of takween, as we stated previously. And this is, I don't know where the narrator got this from, because the Imam answered really directly. And if the Imam meant the actual to say خلق تقدير لا خلق تكوين, he would have said, or he would have elaborated, because his answer as it is the wrong answer according to the Shia of today. So Saduq then, in his book, he elaborates, and he says, وَمُخَالِفُونَ يَشَنَّعُونَ عَلَيْنَا, and our opponents, they were attacking us. And he's saying, because they believe that the opponents are saying that, oh, we believe that God willed for Al-Hussein to die. He says, وَنَقُولُ, Saduq says, but we say, إن يزل الله تعالى عالما بأن الحسين سيقتل ويدرك بقتله سعادة الأبد. God has always known through eternity that Al-Hussein shall be killed and that he shall reach eternal happiness by his martyrdom, basically. وَنَقُولُ, and we say, he says, مَا شاء الله كان وَمَا لَمْ يَشَأْ لَمْ يَكُنْ. Whatever Allah wills will happen, and whatever Allah does not will not happen. So what does this tell you about Saduq here? What does it tell you? He's saying God always knew that Hussein was going to die, and then whatever God wills will happen, will happen. So this is Jabr, and this is why Mufid and Murtada went ballistic on Saduq, as we will see next. So Al-Mufid, in his commentary on Aqa'id Saduq, page 12, he criticizes him really harshly. He says what is correct, or what is authentic, as transmitted from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, that the actions of the servants are not created by God. وَالَّذِي ذَكَرَهُ أبو جعفر, and what Saduq has mentioned has only reached us through a narration that is ignored and abandoned, and its chain is weak, so he weakens his chain. As if Al-Mufid knows more about chains than Saduq. So Al-Mufid weakened this chain. وَالْأَخْبَارُ الصَّحِيحَ بِخِلَافِهِ, and the authentic narrations contradict this report, meaning this report that says that they are created خَلْقَ تَقْدِير and not خَلْقَ تَقْوِير. So he didn't like this. He didn't like that God predetermined things. And Saduq tried to put it in like a nice little way and say, oh, creation of predetermination, meaning they are just in God's foreknowledge. Foreknowledge meaning God's previous knowledge, meaning God knew about what was going to happen before it happened. So Al-Mufid didn't like this because it sounds like God basically destined Al-Hussein to die, and he created him basically to die like this. So Al-Mufid says, وَلَيْسَ يُعْرَفُ فِي لُغَةِ الْعَرَبِ أَنَّ الْعِلْمَ بِالشَّيْءِ هُوَ خَلْقٌ لَهُ. And it's not known in the language of the Arabs that knowing something is equal to creating something. So he's criticizing him. Why are you saying خَلْقَ تَقْدِير, a creation of predestination? Because if you're saying that taqdeer here simply means knowledge, then knowledge is not called khalq. It's not creation. He could have just said, and Allah knew about it, instead of saying khalq taqdeer and khalq, and using these confusing statements to confuse the people. And so he's saying it means God's foreknowledge, not his creation. So Al-Mufid continues and he says, فَأَمَّا التَّقْدِيرُ فَهُوَ الْخَلْقُ. As for taqdeer, predetermining things and determining them and measuring them precisely, is فَهُوَ الْخَلْقُ, is creation. في اللغة لأن التقدير لا يكون إلا بالفعل فأما بالعلم فلا يكون تقديرا. It is not, he says it has nothing to do with knowledge. If you're saying that God created things or predestined things, that means that's it, he created them. End of story. So this shows that Saduq was trying to interpret things in a way that they shouldn't be interpreted. In fact, Al-Murtada, if you read Al-Murtada's book, he criticizes Saduq and he says that we believe that the actions of the servants are created by them, both a creation of taqween, meaning in the real physical world, and a creation of taqdir, meaning through their will and their choice. And that God has nothing to do with it. Neither the creation of taqdir is for God, nor the creation of taqween is for God. As opposed to Saduq, who was saying that the creation of taqdir is for God and the creation of taqween is for the servant. So then Al-Mufid wants to back up his previous statement. So he digs through the Shia narrations, he doesn't find much. I'll quote you one of the narrations that he quoted to refute As-Saduq. He says, وَقَدْ رُوِيَ عَنْ أَبِي الْحَسَنِ, and it was narrated from Abi al-Hasan that he was asked about the actions of the servants. فَقِيلَ لَهُ هَلْ هِيَ مَخْلُوقَ لِلَّهِ, is it that God created it? So he replied, لَوْ كَانَ خَالِقًا لَهَا لَمَا تَبَرَّأَ مِنْهَا. If he was the one who created the actions of the servants, he wouldn't declare himself to be innocent and free from these actions. And then he quotes the verse in the Quran that says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَرِيءٌ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ وَرَسُولِهِ. God and his messengers are free or innocent from the polytheists, meaning of having anything to do with them. And then the Imam elaborates, وَلَمْ يُرِدْ الْبَرَاءَ مِنْ خَلْقِ ذَوَاتِهُمْ وَإِنَّمَا تَبَرَّأَ مِنْ شِرْكِهِمْ وَقَبَائِحِهِمْ. He says that God meant that he is innocent and free from their actions of polytheism. Not that he is innocent of actually creating their bodies. Obviously, God created their bodies. However, their actions, they take its responsibility because it's their own action. So this is what he quoted, and most likely this is weak. And obviously it's going to conflict with the other authentic stuff that we read in Al-Kafi. And it's a weak argument in and of itself because we can quote Surah Al-An'am, verse 107, where God says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا أَشْرَكُوا. And if God hadn't willed it, they wouldn't have been permitted to do polytheism, or they wouldn't have been able to associate partners with him. So this shows that God, it is by his will. So again, this is a refutation for that. Now, Al-Mufid, realizing that all of the narrations are pretty much either they're Jabri or they are the station between the two stations, but there isn't much narrations from Ahlul Bayt supporting the Mu'tazili position. So what he did is that he said in that same book that all of the narrations are to be rejected because they conflict with the Quran, and then he quoted verses from the Quran. And these are the same verses, exact same verses used by the Mu'tazila, by the way, which shows that he's greatly influenced by them. And with those verses, he simply discarded all of the ahadith that we had previously read and others like them. Now, as we said, Al-Mufid didn't accept to say that the servants create their own actions. So he, out of respect for God. So he says in Awa'il al-Maqalat, page 25, he says, أقول إن الخلق يفعلون ويحدثون ويخترعون ويصنعون ويكتسبون ولا أطلق القول عليهم بأنهم يخلقون ولا هم خالقون. He said that I say that the servants, they find and they create and they craft and they acquire, but I do not say generally that they create, as in create their actions. ولا هم الخالقون, nor that they are creators. ولا أتعدى ذلك فيما ذكره الله تعالى ولا أتجاوز بموضعه من القرآن. And he's saying that this is وعلى هذا إجماع الإمامية والزيدية والبغداديين من المعتزلة. And he's saying that this is by consensus. What he just said here, he's saying this is by consensus of the Imami Shia, of the Zaydi Shia, of the Mu'tazilites of Baghdad, and the majority of the Murji'ah, and the Ashab al-Hadith, the people of Hadith. And the only group that opposed are the Mu'tazilats of Basra, who used to say that the servants create their own actions and had no issue saying that. And next we will see that the Shia actually got influenced specifically by the Mu'tazilites of Basra and began saying that the servants create their own actions. Now it's time to show how the Twelver Shia of our days followed and imitated specifically the Mu'tazila of Basra, or Bisra, as they say, and how they basically are saying now that the actions are created by the servants. So with that, we will quote the contemporaries. الحر العاملي says in الفصول المهمة في أصول الأئمة, page 81. He says, أقول, I say, مذهب الإمامية والمعتزلة أن أفعال العباد صادرة عنهم وهم خالقون لها. I say that the opinion of the Imami Shia and the Mu'tazilites is that the actions of the servants are done by them and they are its creators. So as you can see, the guy has no issue saying that the servants are creating their own actions. Also, we quote At-Tabatabai, another contemporary, and he has a book called Majalis al-Muwahhidin. This is on page 21. He says, ذهبت الإمامية والمعتزلة إلى أن أفعال العباد وحركاتهم واقعة بقدرتهم واختيارهم فهم خالقون لها. He's saying the Imami Shia and the Mu'tazila both are of the opinion that the servants, their actions and their movements are committed through their power or are done through their power and through their choice. فهم خالقون لها. Therefore they are its creators. وما في الآيات من أنه تعالى خلق كل شيء وأمثالها إما مخصص بما سوى أفعال العباد. And he's saying that if you read in the verses that God is a creator of all things, then this is then we take the actions of the servants to be like an exception here, and we don't include it as being a part of everything. So unfortunately, yeah, they followed the Mu'tazila, and they always did, and that's why this madhab of the Shia is always shifting and morphing. Even though, as you read previously, there's narrations where the Imams of the Shia themselves, the 12 Imams or whatever, that they're criticizing the Mu'tazila and criticizing the Qadariyah and accusing them of the worst things. Yet they go and they mimic them, subhanAllah. We have, for example, in Tafsir al-Qummi, we have from Sakuni, قال أبو عبد الله أبو عبد الله عليه السلام says, وجدت لأهل القدر أسماء في كتاب الله. He says, I found a good title or a good name or label to the people of Qadr, the deniers of predestination, in the book of Allah. And then he quotes a verse that refutes them. He quotes the verse which says, إِنَّ الْمُجْرِمِينَ فِي ضَلَالٍ. He says, indeed the criminals are in error and madness. The day they are dragged into the fire on their faces, it will be said, taste the touch of saqar. Indeed, all things we created with predestination. So it's saying everything we created with a predestination. So the verse is refuting them. فَهُمِ الْمُجْرِمُونَ. The Imam says, therefore, they are the criminals. And then they go and then you find their later scholars mimicking them. So this was in Tafsir al-Qummi. Also, you have a lot of similar things. There's a whole bunch of narrations criticizing the Mu'tazila and the deniers of predestination in the books of the Shia. You have in Bihar al-Anwar narration, إِنَّكَ لَا تَسْأَلْ عَنْ كَلَامِ أَهْلِ الْقَدْرِ. The Imam is saying, you are asking about the statements and opinions of the people who deny destination. He says, وَمَا هُوَ مِنْ دِينِي وَلَا دِينِ آبَائِي. It is not of my religion, nor is it of the religion of my forefathers. وَلَا وَجَدْتُ أَحْدًا مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ يَقُولُ بِهِ. And I did not find anyone from my household who is of this opinion. Meaning he's disassociating himself from them and disowning them. Also in another hadith, Bihar al-Anwar, he says, وَيْحُ هَذِهِ الْقَدَرِيَّ أَمَا يَقْرَؤُونَ هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ. He says, woe to those deniers of predestination. Do they not read this verse? And he says, إِلَّا امْرَأَتَهُ فَقَدَّرْنَاهَا مِنَ الْغَابِرِينَ. He says, we saved him and his family, except for his wife. We destined her, we destined her to be of those who remained behind. مِنَ الْغَابِرِينَ. وَيْحَهُمْ مَنْ قَدَّرَهَا إِلَّا اللَّهُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى. Who else destined her except God Most High, he's saying, because those guys deny the destination. So with this we conclude, and this is the end of this really long video, and hopefully we don't have to make long videos like these again. A question you might have is, what about the Shia of our days? Do they not understand that all of those narrations are in their books and a lot of them are authentic, and that the opinions that they are taking from the Mu'tazila actually opposes the narrations that are found in their books? Do they not understand this? And the answer is yes. Some of them, although a minority, actually oppose the majority opinion and still believe that the servants do not create their own actions. Here I will quote Al-Mudaffar, who's one of their biggest scholars in his book Aqa'id al-Imamiyya, page 67-68. He says, أن أفعالنا من جهة هي أفعالنا حقيقة ونحن أسبابها الطبيعية وهي تحت قدرتنا واختيارنا. He's saying our actions, from in one sense, we are its natural causes and its effective causes, and they are under our choice and our power. ومن جهة أخرى, however, in another sense, هي مقدورة لله تعالى وداخلة في سلطانه. They are also under the power and authority of God subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is the creator of all existence. فلم يجبرنا على أفعالنا حتى يكون قد ظلمنا على المعاصي. So He did not compel us to do these actions, and therefore He did not oppress us by causing us to do disobedience. لأن لنا القدرة والخيار, because we have a choice and the ability فيما نفعله, in whatever we do. ولم يفوض إلينا خلق أفعال حتى يكون قد خرجها عن سلطانه. And He did not consign to us the creation of our own actions so that they are basically outside of His own authority. So here He's clearly saying that He did not make tafweed and give us the ability and power to create our own actions. Rather, He's doing the creating. بل له الخلق والأمر. Rather, for Him is the creation and the command. وهو قادر على كل شيء ومحيط بالعباد. And He is capable of all things and all encompassing of His servants. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.